Hey everybody, this is Anne. Welcome back to Painting Big. So today I'm here to talk about, yes, what everybody has been wanting, more about MSP 2.0 and Reaper Master Series paint in general. So today I'm going to show you guys direct comparison of how the coverage of the paints has changed, show you the consistency, talk about how to use them on various palettes, and talk about the features we built into Master Series that make them a little bit different from all the other paint lines out there. All right, let's get to it. Okie dokie, you can see my little card I've already set up. So I've picked a couple of colors today to show you what I mean when I say that when we added pigment, a lot of colors got better coverage. So I've got two. One of them is definitely a problem color. Lemon yellow has had no excuse for not covering for as long as I can remember it, since I made the poor thing. I love the color because I love using light greenish yellows to just add in like whole hog as a highlight. It builds up a warmer, lighter highlight just in one color, and I love that. But the coverage on this and the punch to it has just been substandard for a very long time, so I'm happy to finally be able to fix that. The next color is one that's much more recent. Cat's Eye Green is a bones color. So not that these days it's the same as any other, everything is being rolled in, but these paints were done a lot later in my development as a paint line designer, and so I was able to use a lot more knowledge. But even then we were able to make significant improvements. So I'm going to get these guys out, and then we're going to paint them over the black and white card, and we will see the difference. So I also did one of these comparison videos for Reaper when I was recently at their factory. That'll come out when the Kickstarter fires up, which I think is going to be later this fall. Here's the original lemon yellow, so let's just paint it right over there. Yeah, less than awesome, as you can see. Now, Reaper Master Series has always worked better over white, gray, and zenith primes. The natural transparency to the paint means that it works really well over zenith base coats, but this is a bit more than I like to see. So, let's look at the new one. So we can see right away that there's a definite increase in coverage. It's not nearly as see-through. It's a little bit more punchy. The thing you can't see on camera is that it's also got a nice creamy consistency. The old one was a bit watery, just wasn't quite didn't feel real good. The new one is very creamy and it slides right off the brush. We'll let those dry and let's go to the green. And then I'm going to show you actually a dried comparison, which is even more striking. So old Cat's Eye Green. Again, you can see right through it. Now, both of these colors, the lemon yellow and the Cat's Eye Green, they have white in them. And when you've got a color with white in it, in my opinion, there isn't much excuse for it not covering decently. So when we went back around, we added more of every pigment, not just white, but the other pigments as well, to balance out the color and make it work. This is a huge change. So this one, boom. Now, MSP 2.0 has better coverage. It's not going to be one coat coverage. One thing to understand, I guess, is you have to understand the mind behind the line in some cases. Unlike every other paint line on the planet, Reaper understands that you might need coverage for your base coat and maybe for wet blending. But for a lot of the techniques that we use, you actually thin your paint. So you want a little bit of transparency. So what we did is essentially work with more fluid bases and work with mostly just pigment rather than giving you a really goopy plasticky base. We worked with just pigments for coverage, both the high density pigments, which naturally cover better because of the science behind them, and just standard pigments like, when a paint has white in it, add a little more white plus other pigments, and you can usually get it with a higher pigment load to cover better. That said, you can see that we're not just blowing the color out, right? We still get a nice bright yellow, and we aren't just adding white in until it's all over coverage. This is a color I use to build highlights a lot of the time, and a lot of people they'd use it to highlight their yellows. You don't want to have to fight to get the brush strokes out. So having that little bit of transparency actually means that with a little bit of thinning, you can get smooth blends a lot easier with a lot less water added. So I'm going to grab a primer plate, one of my old pebbly primer plates. I actually dabbed a couple of these down earlier so that they could fully dry. And there you see it. Now you can see the difference here, and this is over, a dark gray. It's black primer with a little bit of white overspray. But look at how thin that cat's eye green is, and then look at the new one, right? And here again, you can really see the difference between these two versions of the same color. You can also see that the lemon yellow, the new one, is much punchier, which is a little harder to see, I think, over the white. So, because this paint has a creamy fluid viscosity out of the bottle, like if I drag my brush through it, you can see the paint close up pretty quick behind it. That's self-leveling, and that's what gives you things like a smooth base coat. For a lot of today's paints, of the thicker variety, you have to add water to get this effect. You don't need to with MSP. And in fact, if you're using MSP or MSP 2.0 on a wet palette, I advise you to use a very dry wet palette. This isn't saying that you're not going to get good results with MSP on a wet palette. My husband, who's a Golden Demon winning painter, uses MSP to paint almost exclusively. And he uses a wet palette that's so dry, the paper is curling up at the edges. But that's how he gets the best mileage with this particular paint line. So you just have to remember not to load a ton of water in your wet palette. When you're using a thick paint, that doesn't hurt you so much because the paint itself is pretty goopy and thick. It can take a bit of water leaching into it, and it just, essentially it pre-thins it for you. But with MSP, you don't need to do that. So use a drier wet palette, or you can do what I do and use a well. This is a ceramic well. It's a porcelain well. It's very easy to clean up. As you can see, I can use a green scrubby and a bit of hot water just to scrub the paint out, even if it dries a little bit. And the nice thing about having a lot of little wells is you can mix up lots of transitions of color if you need to. I usually do test mixes up on the top of the well palette. And because MSP is in dropper bottles, it's very easy then to get your bottle of water and do ratios. So I usually always start with 4 drops of paint and 1 drop of water. For base coating, I'll use 4 or 5 drops of paint to 1 drop of water, and I like to put down 2 smooth coats. So once I add that 1 drop of water, this closes up right away. It self-levels right away, and that's the sign of a paint that's going to give you a nice smooth base coat. Speaking of all this, MSP thins best with just water. It always has. This is something that I think Reaper talked about a lot when we first launched the line, and then, after the first 5 years, we just stopped talking about it. But MSP is made to thin with just water. It's really not necessary to use anything else. Sometimes I will use a mixture of water and flow improver that I pre-bottle. And that's if I need a little extra for detailing, or if I'm doing any kind of fine work where I just think, freehand, whatever, I just want a little extra oomph on this. But I don't have to. And even in an airbrush, people use just water. There are exceptions. Some people choose to use water plus a tiny bit of isopropyl alcohol, usually a 9-to-1, I think, a 9 or 10-to-1 scale as far as the ratio in that. So mostly water with just a little bit of isopropyl. But it's not necessary to use an airbrush medium of any kind when you're using MSP. In fact, MSP formulas all include flow improver, so you don't need to actually add any. That was a decision I made early on because always when I was painting in the early days, it seemed like I had a custom mix of flow improver, slow dry, water, and whatever else I was going to throw in there. I called it my gunk mix. And I had to add that to pretty much every paint I was working with to make it into something I actually felt good about working with. And so going into this line, I didn't want people to have to do that. I wanted them really to just be able to use water. That was behind our decision to add flow improver out of the gate. Now, the flow improver we used is one that helps with self-leveling and keeping paint in solution. There are also flow improvers that break surface tension, and that's what I'm using here in this bottle. So if you do add flow improver, using one that specifically acts to break surface tension is going to give you the most bang for your buck with MSP. This awesome purple on her hair is also an MSP 2.0 color, by the way. It was one of the ReaperCon colors. So for a base coat, I'm most often using 4 or 5 drops of paint, 1 drop of water. And as I mentioned, for base coats, I really do like 2 smooth coats. I also want to mention that MSP 2.0 will have a coverage meter on the bottle. Those of you who've watched Ron's videos have heard about that. And essentially it's going to be a little, almost a little speedometer symbol that'll tell you if the paint is going to be high coverage, where it should almost be 1 coat, or if it's going to be moderate coverage, which I would class all of these as. Moderate coverage definitely has a range to it. Or if it's going to be low coverage, so more transparent. In addition, colors that are more transparent should say so on the bottle. The label's still a work in progress, but they generally will have translucent or transparent in parentheses underneath the name. So you'll know what you're getting into. I would say that the high coverage are going to cover in one coat or one in a touch-up. Medium's going to take you the two smooth coats that I'm used to working with. And I probably wouldn't use the translucent paints as a base coat. If you do, put them down over white. This Runic Glow that I'm working with also, I would say, is a moderate coverage paint. Also, so you know, the skin tones on this model were completely done with MSP 2.0. Lively Skin and the new reformulated Fair Skin. So you can kind of see the blends you can achieve with it. So speaking of blending, for layering, I would say I'm thinning more like what I'm doing on the hair here. Although I actually do want the tips of her hair, I think, to go up to a pink in general. But layering, typically I thin about... For the most transparent colors, you could thin about 3-to-1 paint to water. For moderate colors, I'd say 2-to-1 to 1-to-1, depending on the color. As I said, there's a range. There very much is a range as far as the moderate opacity and what it's going to be like. I would say for the most opaque colors, I would even go 1 to 2. Those would be colors that have a lot of white in them or a lot of black in them. Our black is a high density black and it covers very, very well. So to get good blending with those, you're going to need to add more water. That said, it should never be a case, like it is with some thicker paints, of you having to add like 5 drops of water to like 1 or 2 drops of paint to make it layer. Like, the only thing that you might do that with would be pure white itself, which typically has around a 2.5 to 1, so about a 2 drops of paint to 5 drops of water ratio, but only pure white has that kind of ratio. So glazing, I'd say that's when you're going to be adding a fair amount of water. Usually I'd say 1 to 2 paint to water, so like 1 drop of paint, 2 drops of water. Or something like 1 to 3, depending on, again, the natural transparency or opacity of the paint, and also depending on the situation. A lot of times if we glaze, we might want something very, very thin, very colored water, right? If we just want to have a very small effect with a glaze. But sometimes we're going to want a heavier glaze. Sometimes we're like, no, my layering is really rough. That's the consistency there. My layering is really rough and I want to blend it in. So yeah, it's going to vary a little bit. But that said, I did want to mention that the new 2.0, the viscosity, you should find is very creamy and very consistent across all colors. We worked hard with our bases and our pigment loads to standardize so that everything would be a little bit more predictable for you as a painter. So, all right, a few more things. The finish of Reaper paint hasn't changed. We have a matte, but it's not a dead matte. There's a little bit of life to it. You can kind of see a little bit as the light moves across her skin. It's not a dead matte. I've never liked a dead matte because I feel like it's very unforgiving for new people. It's really easy with a dead matte to see all of your brush strokes, and that can be a real put-off when you're trying to learn. Conversely, having a satin paint is also frustrating, but on the opposite end. When you're trying to do textures or fine detail, having a glossy or satin paint can absolutely foil that because the shine of the paint will hide all your hard work. So with Reaper, we go for something that's kind of in the middle. It's what I'd call a soft matte. It's got life to it. It's not a dead matte, but it's definitely matte. All right, just a couple more things and we can be done. One, MSP and 2.0 both mix very well with other paint lines. I habitually mix them with other paints because I love my MSP and I find that adding them to other paints actually improves almost everything else that I've ever worked with. Almost. The exception is a paint line that requires a specific thinner for itself. So like some of the Tamiya colors, cuttlefish, things like that. Those paint lines, no true water-based paint is going to mix really well with. So MSP follows that convention. However, everything else, including tube paint, artist tube paints, I found it to mix very well with. Other than that, I'm going to wrap this up, but I want to mention two things that the MSP line is kind of unique for. And one of those is going to be liners. This is a prototype. It's Black Knight. It's a blue-violet liner. Liners are more fluid paints. They are meant for dark lining, so I wanted something that was more fluid out the gate. If you use them at close to full strength, you'll get a nice bold line. As you thin them, they will go translucent quickly, and they can be used just as general all-purpose shaders. They're very good at that, and they also make excellent washes. So for 2.0, these will come in 3 colors. We've got brown liner, my personal favorite for everything, blue liner, which is a really pleasing soft blue-black, and then Black Knight liner, which, as I mentioned, has some violet in it, so more interesting cold shadows. And then we've got matte additive, also known as anti-shine additive. This formulation has actually been redone and is available now if you order it. So, Rhonda Bender explained this to me really, really well at ReaperCon as to why she felt like this was possibly the most unique thing about MSP, because nobody else in all of the art industry gives you this. When you go looking in the industry for something that will make your paint more matte, so say you got a paint that's slightly glossy, you love the color, you just wish it was more matte, the only thing you're going to find are matte mediums. And the problem with mediums is that they thin your paint at the same time as, giving them matte qualities. Matte additive is the matting medium we use in MSP. It has been formulated to be a little more fluid. The old version was much more strong and it was harder to use. So here I'm using a bunch of paint conditioners, a little bit of flow improver, the matting additive, and I've made something that stays fluid. Do shake it well, it will settle out. But it will matte out any paint you add it to. Just pretty much use 4 or 5 drops of your paint or an equivalent, and then throw a drop of matte additive in there, test it, add more if you need it. I use this stuff when I use artist tube paints all the time, because a lot of artist tubes, like the new golden stuff I've been using, they're going to dry with a satin finish, and I really, really don't like satin finishes. So now I just put a drop of this in, and it fixes it right away. So this is something that we've put out really for years that, as far as I know, no one else does. So keep an eye out for that. If you want to order it now, you can try it out. The item number is 9215, I believe. But you can type in matte additive or anti-shine additive and you'll likely get it. So hopefully I've answered some questions. I am going to do a separate video about using MSP 2.0 with a wet palette soon. And I'm also going to do one on our pigments. I know there have been questions about the pigments that we use. So I wanted to do a little bit more about that as well. In addition, this came out at ReaperCon. And I'm planning to, and you can see 2 of those colors I used today. Actually, 3 of those colors I was using on stream today. But I'll be doing a little thing for my Patreon about these colors as well. You'll find kind of a synopsis of this in the $2 PDF, but if you want more on the colors and more on like their qualities, then I'd recommend picking up the $5 tier. That's my color workshop. I regularly do reviews of new paint lines. I talk about my favorite colors from MSP and what they're good for and kind of what their qualities are and how to utilize them. So I am going to leave you there. And I hope you don't mind me painting while I talk. I find that it's a lot more entertaining if I'm working on something than just making you guys look at a talking head all day. So even if it's my head, I mean, I'm attached to it, right? Bad puns aside, thank you much for tuning in. I hope this has answered some questions you have. If you have more questions about MSP 2.0 and specific ones, I'd encourage you to join my Patreon as a free patron and comment in the MSP questions post. That's the easiest way for me to see your questions. I don't have a lot of time to go on YouTube and answer questions, but I'll try to make time. So that's it. Thanks for watching. I'll be back again soon, and this is Anne signing off.